Georges Simenon. Poor men don't get killed, The man murdered in his underwear. Poor men don't get killed. For 2 hours, that's all Maigret could think about. The foolish phrase popped into his head 10, maybe 20 times, haunting him like the persistent chorus of a song overheard by chance. It spun around and around in his mind, impossible to shake. He even muttered aloud a few times. Eventually, a variation emerged. Men in their underwear don't get killed. August in Paris was stifling, wearing a hollow, deserted look of the holiday season. By 9 in the morning, the heat was already oppressive. A heavy silence hung over the depopulated prefecture. Every window facing the quays stood wide open. The moment Maigret entered his office, his first move was to shed his jacket. That was when the call came in from Judge Camilio. "Could you drop by Rue de Dames, please? There was a murder there last night." The local commissaire gave me some long, rambling story. He's on the scene now. No one from the prosecutor's office can get there before 11. It was always the same. Just when you brace yourself for a quiet day in the cool shadows, bang, some piece of filth lands on your desk and ruins everything. Coming Lucas? Naturally. The squad car had been sent elsewhere. They had to take the metro, which reeked of chloride of lime, and where Maigret was forced to extinguish his pipe. The lower end of Rue de Dames, where it meets Rue de Batignolles. The sun was scorching. The street was a riot of movement and color. Pushcarts lined the curbs, piled high with mountains of vegetables, fruit, and fish. Housewives formed a solid wall in front of them, laying siege to the produce. Predictably, a crowd had gathered outside the house where the murder occurred. Boys were seizing the opportunity to dash back and forth, shrieking and shouting. It was an ordinary 7-story building, the kind inhabited by tenants of more than modest means. On the ground floor sat a laundry and a coal merchant shop. A policeman stood guard at the entrance. "The commissaire is expecting you upstairs, Monsieur Maigret. 4th floor. Move along, ladies and gentlemen. Move along. Nothing to see here. Don't block the road. Step aside." What kind of crime could have been committed here in a house full of small, inconspicuous people? The kind of folk who were, as a rule, honest? A drama of love and jealousy? Even for that, the setting seemed all wrong. The 4th floor. A door stood wide open, revealing a kitchen. From within came the noisy scuffling of children. 3 or 4 of them, teenagers between 12 and 16. A woman's voice drifted in from another room. "Gerard, leave your sister alone, do you hear me?" The voice was shrill yet exhausted. The sound of a woman who had spent her life in a petty struggle against daily hardships. The inner door opened, and Maigret saw the victim's wife. It was she who had just yelled at Gerard. Beside her stood the local police commissaire. Maigret shook his hand. The woman looked at Maigret and sighed, as if to say, "Another one." "This is Commissaire Maigret," the local officer explained. "He'll be leading the investigation." "Does that mean I have to tell it all over again?" The room served as both a living and dining area. In one corner sat a radio, in another a sewing machine. Street noise flooded through the open window. The kitchen door was also open, letting in the shouts and squeals of the children. But then the woman pulled the door shut, and the voices died away like a radio abruptly switched off. "Something like this could only happen to me," she said with a sigh. "Sit down, monsieur. Perhaps you like something to drink? I can fetch it. I just don't know. Tell me what happened, but keep it clear and simple." "But I didn't see anything, so what is there to tell? It all feels as if nothing happened at all. He came home as usual at 6:30. He was never late. I even had to give the children a smack every time, because he liked to sit down to eat the moment he arrived." She was speaking of her husband, whose portrait, an enlarged photograph of the two of them together, hung on the wall. It wasn't just the tragic death of her husband that made this woman look so crushed and miserable. Even in the portrait, she looked downtrodden and submissive, as if the weight of the whole world had been dumped onto her shoulders. As for the husband, the photograph captured a pair of mustaches, a stiff starch collar, and a face of the most cloudless serenity. Everything about the man was so mediocre, so ordinary, that even if you had met him 100 times, you wouldn't have noticed him. He came back at 6:30, took off his jacket, and hung it in the wardrobe. He was always careful with his things. I have to say that at 8, Francine arrived. She works, so I'd left her dinner on the table. She had likely already told all of this to the local commissaire, but one felt that if she were asked, she could repeat her story over and over again in that same whimpering voice, her eyes remaining just as anxious as if she were terrified of forgetting a single detail. She was about 45. In her youth, she had probably been pretty, but long years had passed since then, years of being ground down from morning to night by domestic chores. Maurice sat in his favorite spot, by the window, right where you're sitting now. That's his armchair. He was reading a book, but every now and then he'd get up to adjust the radio. At that evening hour, in the houses along Rue de Dames, there were likely at least 100 men doing the exact same thing. Men who, after a full day's work in an office or a shop, were now resting by an open window with a book or the evening paper. I should tell you, he never went out in the evenings. Not alone, I mean, once a week we went to the cinema, all of us together. And on Sundays, at times, she would lose the thread of her story, pausing to listen to commotion in the kitchen, fretting over whether the children were fighting or if something was burning on the stove. Now, where was I? Ah, yes, Francine. She's 17 now. Francine went out for a walk and came back at 10:30. The others were already asleep. I was preparing today's lunch in advance because I was supposed to see the dressmaker this morning. Good Lord. I completely forgot to let her know I wasn't coming, and she's waiting for me. To her, even this was a tragedy. We went to bed, or rather, we went into the bedroom and I got into bed. Maurice always undressed slower than I did. The window was open. We hadn't lowered the blinds because of the heat. No one was watching us from the house opposite. That's a hotel. People arrive and go straight to sleep. You rarely see them at their windows. Maigret sat so still, looking so drowsy, that Lucas thought his chief might actually fall asleep. However, from Maigret's lips, clamped tightly around the stem of his pipe, thin wisps of smoke escaped from time to time. I have so little to tell. No, something like this could only happen to me. We were talking. I don't remember exactly about what, but he kept talking while he took off his trousers and folded them. He was left in his underwear. Then he took off his socks and started scratching the soles of his feet. They always used to ache. Then I heard a sound from the street, like a car engine backfiring. No, not even like that, more like fut-fut. Yes, exactly. Fut-fut, like a water tap when there's air trapped in the pipes. I remember thinking, why has Maurice suddenly stopped mid-sentence? You see, I had already started to drift off because I was so tired from the day. Well, he went silent, and then he says very softly and in such a strange voice, "Filth." I was so surprised because he almost never swore. He wasn't that type of man. I asked him, "What's come over you?" That's when I opened my eyes. I'd been lying there with them closed the whole time, and I saw him collapsing onto the floor. I screamed, "Maurice!" You must understand, the man had never fainted in his life. He wasn't exactly a titan, but he was never ill either. I got up. I called out to him. But there he was, lying face down on the rug, not moving. I tried to lift him, and then I saw it, blood on his shirt. I called Francine, that's our eldest. And what do you think she said to me when she saw her father? "Mama," she says, "what have you done?" And she rushed downstairs to call for help. She had to wake the coal merchant. "And where's Francine?" Maigret asked. "In her room. She's getting dressed." During the night, we had other things to worry about, so we stayed as we were. You'll have to excuse my appearance. First the doctor came, then the police, then the commissaire. "Would you mind leaving us alone for a moment?" She didn't understand at first and asked for clarification. "Leave you alone?" She went into the kitchen, and they could hear her scolding the children, still in that same tedious, monotonous voice. Another 15 minutes of that, and I would have lost my mind. Maigret sighed, stepping to the window to catch a breath of fresh air. It was hard to explain why, but there was something about this woman, who was likely not a bad person at all, that was depressingly bleak. It was something that made even the sunlight streaming through the window feel gray and sullen. In her presence, life itself became so dull, so futile and repetitive, that one couldn't help but wonder if the street outside, with all its movement, sun, color, and noise, was really still there, just a stone's throw away. Poor devil. Not because he was dead, but because he had lived. By the way, what was his name? Tremblet. Maurice Tremblet. 48 years old. The wife said he worked as a cashier for some trading firm en rue, du Sentier. Here, I wrote it down. Coureur and Bellichasse, haberdashery. And to top it all off, haberdashery. Trimmings, braids, and ornaments for coffins and hearses. You know, the local commissaire remarked. At first, I thought she'd killed him herself. I wasn't thinking clearly. I'd been hauled out of bed just as I'd finally fallen asleep. And then, the chaos here, the children all talking at once, her shouting at them to be quiet, repeating the same thing to me 20 times. Exactly what she told you. I decided she was either simple-minded or completely mad. Then my sergeant took it into his head to interrogate her, trying to bluff her. He says, I'm not asking you about that. I'm asking why you killed him. And she just looks at him and says, Why? And what exactly would I have killed him with? The neighbors gathered on the stairs. The local doctor will be bringing me his report soon. He put me on the right track. He claims the shot was fired from a distance, undoubtedly from one of the windows opposite. So I sent my men over to the Hotel Excelsior. The short refrain kept spinning and spinning in Maigret's head. Poor men don't get killed. Especially not poor men sitting in their underwear on the edge of the marriage bed, scratching their weary feet. And did you find anything over there in the house opposite? Maigret carefully examined the windows of the Hotel Excelsior. Truth be told, it was less a hotel and more a boarding house. A black faux marble plaque announced, Rooms by the month, the week, or the day. Hot and cold water. Poverty lived here, too. But just like in the house where the Tremblets lived, it wasn't the kind of poverty that provides a fitting backdrop for a drama. This was a respectable poverty, neatly combed and presented with modest means. I started the search on the 4th floor. All the guests were already in bed. My men had to disturb them. You can imagine the fuss. The landlord was furious, threatening to file a complaint. Then I had the idea to check the 5th floor. And there, directly opposite our, let's call it the target window, I found a room that was empty, even though it's been registered for a week to a certain Joseph Dambois. I questioned the night porter, and he remembers letting someone out of the hotel shortly before midnight, but he has no idea who it was. Maigret finally steeled himself to open the bedroom door. There at the foot of the bed, his head on the rug, his legs on the bare floor, the body of the murdered man still lay. The bullet likely hit the heart, the local officer noted. Death would have been almost instantaneous. I think it's best to wait for our forensic pathologist. Let him extract the bullet. He should be arriving any minute now with the officials from the prosecutor's office. At 11 o'clock, Maigret murmured absently. It was currently 10:15. Outside, as before, housewives were haggling at the pushcarts, and the sultry air was filled with the delicate scent of fruit and fresh greens. Poor men. Did you search his pockets? He had. That much was obvious. A disorganized heap of men's clothing lay on the table. Despite the wife's claim that Tremblet always folded his things neatly for the night, everything is here. Change, purse, cigarettes, lighter, keys, a wallet containing 100 francs and photos of the children. And the neighbors? My men questioned everyone in the building. The Tremblets have lived in this apartment for 26 years. When the children came along, they took over 2 more rooms. Honestly, there's nothing to say about them. An ordinary, regulated life. No drama. Every year, for their holiday, they go to Cantal for 2 weeks to visit Tremblet's birthplace. They never have visitors, except for the occasional call from Madame Tremblet's sister. Both women were born Lapointe, also from Cantal. Tremblet left the house every day at the same time. He took the metro to work from Villiers Station. He'd return at 12:30, head back an hour later, and arrive home in the evening at 6:30. It makes no sense. Maigret snapped. The exclamation escaped him almost involuntarily. It truly was nonsense, a crime with no visible motive. Nothing had been stolen. No attempt had even been made. And yet, this was no accidental killing. Far from it. It had been meticulously prepared. Someone had to rent a room in the hotel opposite, procure a pistol, perhaps even a pneumatic rifle. This wasn't the work of a random passerby. And you don't go to such lengths for some poor devil. Yet Tremblet was precisely the kind of man people described as exactly that. Just some poor devil. Won't you stay for the people from the prosecutor's office? I'll be back before they leave. Please stay and brief them on the case. Through the wall came the sound of another noisy scuffle. It wasn't hard to guess. Madame Tremblet, née Lapointe, was at war with her children again. By the way, how many does she have? 5. 3 sons and 2 daughters. One of the boys caught pleurisy this winter and is staying in the country with Tremblet's parents. He's nearly 14. Coming Lucas? Maigret had no desire to see Madame Tremblet again or to hear her dreary refrain. Something like this could only happen to me. He descended the stairs heavily, passing doors that opened one after another, followed by the sound of rapid whispering. He considered stopping at the coal merchant's for a glass of wine, but the tiny shop was packed with gawkers waiting for the officials to arrive. Maigret preferred to walk as far as Rue de Batignolles, where the neighborhood knew nothing of the night's drama. What are you drinking? You look into that fellow from the Hotel Excelsior. You won't find much, of course, because to pull off a job the way he did, well, hey, taxi. So much for the accounting department. It was too hot to swelter in the metro or stand on a corner waiting for a bus. Meet me back at Rue de Dames. If not, then this afternoon at the quay. Poor men don't get killed, damn it. And if they are killed, it's not one by one. It's in batches, in wars or riots. If a poor man decides to end his life, he hardly goes out and gets a pneumatic rifle for the job, and he certainly doesn't shoot himself while sitting on his bed scratching his heels. If Tremblet hadn't been a native of some place like Cantal, if he'd had some high-sounding foreign name, one might suspect him of belonging to some obscure secret society of his countrymen. But he didn't even look like the kind of man who gets murdered. His face was all wrong, that was the hitch. That's what was so baffling. And the setting? This apartment. The wife, 5 children, a husband in his underwear, and that fut-fut of the passing bullet. The taxi's top was down. Maigret smoked his pipe, occasionally shrugging his shoulders. For a moment, his thoughts turned to Madame Maigret. Poor thing, she would say, and she would certainly sigh. When a man dies, a woman always sympathizes with a woman left behind. No, I don't know the number. Yes, Rue du Seigneur, Couvreur and Bellechasse. Likely something solid. One of those venerable trading houses, established in 1800 and something. He didn't understand, and it irritated him. It irritated him because he couldn't stand the inexplicable. Rue du Seigneur was choked with people and vehicles. Slowing down, the driver spoke to a pedestrian and asked for the address. And at that moment, Maigret saw the words emblazoned on a storefront in elegant gold letters. Couvreur and Bellechasse. Wait for me. I won't be long. In truth, he didn't know how long he'd be, but the heat had left him completely drained. And why wouldn't it? Nearly all his colleagues, and even the inspectors, were away on holiday. He'd spent the morning counting on a peaceful day of leisure in his office. The second floor, a suite of dark rooms that felt somewhat like a church vestry. May I see Monsieur Couvreur? Is it personal business? Strictly personal. I am very sorry. Monsieur Couvreur passed away 5 years ago. And Monsieur Bellechasse? Monsieur Bellechasse has left for Normandy. If you wish, you may speak with Monsieur Maigret. Who is he? The firm's authorized representative. He is at the bank right now, but he'll be back shortly. Tell me, is Monsieur Tremblet here? A look of bewilderment followed. I beg your pardon? Who did you say? Monsieur Tremblet, Maurice Tremblet. I don't know the name. Your cashier? Our cashier's name is Maigret, Gaston Maigret. Well, there's a turn up for the books, Maigret thought. Clichés seem to be haunting him today. Will you wait for Monsieur Maigret? Yes, I'll have to. He sat there, inhaling the sickly sweet smell of haberdashery and cardboard boxes. Fortunately, it didn't last too long. Monsieur Maigret turned out to be a gentleman in his 60s, dressed from head to toe in black. You wish to speak with me? Maigret, Divisional Commissaire, Criminal Police. If those words were meant to make an impression, Maigret was mistaken. To what do I owe the honor? If I'm not mistaken, you have a man named Tremblet working here as a cashier? He did work here quite a long time ago. Wait, it was the year we modernized our branch in Cambrai. Yes, 7 years ago. A bit more, even, because he left us in the middle of spring. Monsieur Maigret adjusted his pince-nez. In short, Monsieur Tremblet has not been in our employ for 7 years. You haven't seen him since? Personally? No. Were you satisfied with him as an employee? Absolutely. I knew him very well. He started here only a few years after I did. He was a man of the highest integrity, a most punctual worker. He left us, as I recall, for a very valid reason, following all the proper formalities. Yes, for family reasons. He stated in his resignation that he intended to settle back in his home region, Auvergne, I believe, or perhaps Cantal. I don't quite remember now. Was this always in order? Monsieur Maigret recoiled slightly, as if he'd been personally insulted. I beg your pardon, but we don't have that sort of thing here. And did you ever happen to hear if Monsieur Tremblet had a mistress, or perhaps some vice? No, monsieur, never. And I am convinced it would have been impossible for him. Short and clear, if Maigret didn't realize he was overstepping, even for a police commissaire. However, Maigret didn't back down. Strange. The fact is, for 7 years, up to and including yesterday, Monsieur Tremblet left his house every morning to come to work at your office, and every month he brought home his salary to his wife. I ask your pardon, but that is simply not possible. The man was unequivocally showing him the door. So he was a model employee, an excellent employee, and there was nothing in his behavior. No, monsieur, nothing. You must excuse me. I have 2 wholesale buyers from provinces waiting, and... Oof! What a stifling atmosphere. It was almost as bad as the rooms on Rue de Dames. It was a relief to be back in the fresh air, to see his taxi again, and the driver, who had already managed to grab a glass of mineral water at the local bistro and was now wiping his mustache. Where to, Monsieur Maigret? All the drivers knew him, and in its own way, that was a small comfort. Rue de Dames, old friend. So that was that. For 7 years straight, this Maurice Tremblet had left home at the appointed hour, headed off to work. And for 7 years straight, pull over somewhere along the way. I need to jump out for a quick drink at a bar. He needed it before facing Madame Tremblet again, not to mention the gentlemen from the prosecutor's office, who were likely already swarming the little apartment on Rue de Dames. Poor men. The real question was he actually a poor man at all? 2. The killer with the ailing liver and the canary lover. What's wrong, Maigret? Can't you sleep? It must have been nearly 3 a.m. Yet Maigret was still tossing and turning, drenched in sweat despite both bedroom windows being flung wide over Boulevard Richard Lenoir. Several times he had drifted toward the edge of sleep, but as soon as his wife's breathing beside him became deep and rhythmic, he found himself, against his own will, thinking once again of Tremblet, of his poor man, as he now called him in his head. Something was wrong. A detail was slipping away like a jagged fragment of a dream. Maigret kept returning to the starting point. 8:30 a.m. In the cramped apartment on Rue de Dames, Maurice Tremblet finished his dressing. Beside him is the dismal Madame Tremblet. Maigret now knew her name was Juliet, perhaps the least fitting name imaginable for her. There she is, the dismal Juliet in hair curlers, wearing the expression of a great martyr, while trying to quiet the rowdy children, an effort that only makes the racket louder. He couldn't stand noise, Monsieur Commissaire. Why did that specific detail strike Maigret more than anything else he had heard there? Why, in his half-dreaming state, did his memory claw back to it again and again, to loathe noise, and yet to live on Rue de Dames, a street so crowded, bustling, and narrow, and with 5 children who did nothing but provoke one another, and with this Juliet, who hadn't the faintest idea how to settle them. He's getting dressed. Fine, go on. Shaving. Every other day, according to Juliet. He drinks a cup of café au lait and eats 2 rolls. He steps out onto the street, walks toward Boulevard de Batignolles, and catches a metro at Villiers Station. Maigret had spent the entire afternoon following his visit to Couvreur and Bellechasse, cooped up in his office, dealing with routine paperwork. Meanwhile, at the police's request, the evening papers were already running front-page portraits of Maurice Tremblet. Sergeant Lucas, in the meantime, had headed to the Hotel Excelsior, armed with photographs of every habitual offender and ex-convict whose appearance even vaguely matched the description of the man, calling himself Joseph Dambois, the killer. Studying the photos, the hotel proprietor, a man from Auvergne, shook his head. I didn't see much of him, truth be told, but I don't think he's one of those types. It took a great deal of patience for the sergeant to realize what the proprietor meant. The guest with the pneumatic rifle didn't look like a criminal at all. His appearance was utterly harmless. When he came in and asked for a room for the week, I took him for some kind of night watchman, an inconspicuous man, middle-aged. Very few people had seen him, as he only returned to his room at night and left early in the morning. Did he have any luggage? A small satchel, the kind footballers carry, and a mustache, ginger, according to the owner, graying, according to the night porter. Then again, they saw him under different lighting. He was poorly dressed, not dirty, mind you, but everything about him was frayed. I made him pay the full week in advance. His wallet was battered, too, and he didn't seem to have much money. Then came the statement from the 5th-floor maid. I never once saw the man, because I didn't clean his room until late morning, after numbers 42 and 43. But you can take my word for it. You could tell from a distance a bachelor was living there. Lucas had sifted through every item in that room, inspecting it meticulously, meter by meter. On the pillow, he found 3 hairs, 2 from a head and 1 from a mustache. On the enameled washstand, an almost empty bottle of cologne, and on the mantelpiece, an old comb with half its teeth missing. That was all, a meager haul, and yet the laboratory managed to extract some facts. According to the experts who spent hours analyzing the comb and the hairs, the killer was between 46 and 48 years old. He was a redhead, though beginning to go gray and bald. He possessed a phlegmatic temperament and suffered from a liver ailment. But that wasn't what Maigret was thinking about as he rolled over in bed. He gets dressed, eats breakfast, takes his hat, and steps out. He walks to the metro on Boulevard de Batignolles. But of course, it wasn't to go to Rue du Sentier, to the offices of Couvreur and Bellechasse, where not a single living soul had seen him for 7 years. He was going somewhere else entirely. Why did Maigret assume that back when Tremblet actually worked for Couvreur and Bellechasse, the metro had been convenient for him? Simple. The Porte de Champéret, pre-Saint Gervais line was direct, no transfers. Tremblet would have stepped out right at Rue du Sentier. And then Maigret suddenly remembered. Tremblet's daughter, Francine, whom he had only glimpsed briefly today, had been working for about a year at a department store on Rue Réaumur. Rue Réaumur at a right angle to Rue du Sentier. It was on the very same metro line. Aren't you sleeping? Madame Maigret asked. I need to find out one thing, he replied. Maybe you know, I assume all those fixed-price department stores belong to the same chain and follow the same schedule. You went to one on Avenue de la République once, didn't you? So, what is it you want to know? What time do they open? At 9. Are you sure about that? Her answer clearly gave him such satisfaction that, before finally dropping off to sleep, he began humming a little tune to himself. And the mother didn't say anything. It was 9:15 in the morning. Maigret sat in his office, listening to Lucas, who had just returned and hadn't yet taken off his straw hat. I explained to her that you needed some additional information, but that you didn't want to trouble her at such a difficult time. So you thought it more appropriate to disturb the daughter. And the daughter? We came by bus, as you ordered. She seems a bit nervous to me. She kept trying to find out why you were summoning her. Tell her to come in. There's also an elderly gentleman who wants to speak with you. Later, tell him to wait. Who is he? Some merchant from the Quai du Louvre. He wants to tell you something, and insists on doing it in person. The air was as sweltering as the day before. A radiant shimmer danced over the Seine, wrapping the long lines of passing barges in a light haze. Francine entered, dressed in a sensible dark blue suit and a white linen blouse. She was a very pretty, very young girl. Blonde curls were framed beautifully by a jaunty red hat. She had a high, well-defined bust. Since yesterday, she clearly hadn't had time to buy a morning dress. Sit down, mademoiselle. If you're hot, please feel free to take off your jacket. Beads of sweat had broken out on her upper lip. Yesterday, your mother told me that you work as a salesgirl at the department store on Rue Raymore. If I'm not mistaken, that's the one near Boulevard de Sebastopol on the left, isn't it? Yes, monsieur. Her lips trembled, and Maigret said she wanted to say something but couldn't bring herself to do it. The store opens at 9 in the morning, doesn't it? And it's located quite near Rue du Seigneur, where your father, or so it was believed, went to work every morning. You must have made that journey together quite often. Only a few times. Are you sure about that? It happened occasionally, of course. And did you part ways with your father at his place of work? Yes, nearby on the corner. So, you never had any suspicions? He puffed gently on his pipe, looking at that youthful face with a most innocent expression, a face now clouded with confusion and alarm. I am sure that a young lady like yourself would not allow herself to lie to the police. You understand perfectly well that it could end in trouble for you, especially at a time like this, when we're doing everything in our power to find your father's killer. Yes, monsieur. She pulled a handkerchief from her purse, pressed it to her eyes, and gave a quiet sob, on the verge of a real breakdown. Those are beautiful earrings. Oh, monsieur. No, really, they are quite lovely. May I? Truly, one might think you already have an admirer. Oh, heavens no, monsieur. They are gold, and those 2 garnets are genuine. No, monsieur, Mamma thought they were real, too, but... I told her they weren't. Because you bought those earrings yourself. Yes, monsieur. So, you didn't give your full salary to your parents? I did, monsieur, but it was agreed that I would keep my overtime pay for myself. And the handbag? Did you buy that yourself, too? Yes, monsieur. Tell me, my dear. She looked up in surprise, and Maigret laughed. All right, that's enough. Enough of what, monsieur? Of making a fool of me. I swear. Excuse me just a moment. Hello? Switchboard? Give me the department store on Rue Raymore. Yes. Wait, monsieur. He signaled her to be silent, and she burst into tears. Hello? The store? Could you put me through to the manager? It's you? This is the criminal police calling. We'd like some information regarding one of your salesgirls. Mademoiselle Francine Tremblet. Yes, please. What? 3 months ago already? Thank you. I may drop by this afternoon. He turned back to the girl. Well now, mademoiselle, I would have confessed anyway. When I was trying to work up the courage. How did it happen? You won't tell Mama, will you? It was only because of her that I didn't want to speak. It would just be more tears and lamentations. If only you knew Mama. I already told you that sometimes Papa and I took the metro together. From a very start, he was against me working, especially at that store. Do you understand? But Mama insisted. She said we weren't rich enough, that she was barely making ends meet as it was, and that it was such a lucky opportunity. She took me to see the manager herself. Well, about 3 months ago, I left the house in the morning without any money and only realized at the corner of Rue du Sentier after I'd said goodbye to Papa. That day, Mama had tasked me with visiting several shops. I ran after Papa, but he walked right past Couvreur and Bellichasse and vanished into the crowd. I thought perhaps he needed to buy cigarettes or something. I was in a great hurry, so I went on to the store. Later that day, I found a free moment and decided to run over to Papa's office. That's when they told me he hadn't worked there for a long time. And that evening, did you tell him everything? No. The next day, I followed him. He headed toward the Seine. Along the way, he happened to turn around and saw me. All he said was, "All the better." What did he mean, all the better? He didn't like me working at the store. He explained that he'd wanted to take me out of there for a long time. He said he'd found another job, much better than the old one, because now he didn't have to sit within four walls all day. That's when he took me to a shop and bought me these earrings. "If your mother asks where you got them, tell her they're fakes," he said. And after that, I quit my job, but I didn't say a word to Mama. On paydays, Papa would give me the money I used to earn at the store. Sometimes we'd meet in the city and go to the cinema together or to the botanical gardens. Do you know what your father did during the day? No, but I understood perfectly well why he said nothing to Mother. If it started giving her more money, nothing would have changed. The house would still be the same mess. It's hard to explain, but if you live with us, you'd understand. Mama isn't a bad person, but... Thank you, mademoiselle. Are you to talk to her about this? I don't know yet. Tell me, did you ever happen to see your father in the company of another person? Never. Did he ever give you an address? We always met somewhere near the Seine by the Pont Neuf or the Pont des Arts. One last question. During these meetings, was he dressed as usual, in the same clothes he wore home on Rue des Dames? Once, just once, about 2 weeks ago, he arrived in a gray suit I'd never seen before. He never wore it at home. Thank you. I assume you mentioned this to no one. No one? No boyfriend in the neighborhood? I swear to you. Maigret was satisfied, though there was no logical reason to be. The case wasn't clearing up. On the contrary, it was becoming more tangled. Perhaps he was simply pleased that his intuition had held firm and his midnight hunch was proven correct. Or perhaps it was because he was already falling for his poor Tremblet, the man who, for years, had managed to lead a double life right under the nose of the dismally gloomy Juliet. Lucas, show the gentleman in. Theodore Gissium, a bird seller from the Quai du Louvre. I've come because of the photograph. You recognize the victim? I should say so, monsieur. He was one of my best customers. And so, yet another side of Maurice Tremblet's life was revealed. At least once a week, he would step into Theodore Gissium's shop and sit there for hours, listening to the birdsong. His passion was canaries. He bought them in great numbers. I sold him no fewer than 3 large aviaries. Did you deliver them to his home? No, monsieur. He took them away himself in a taxi. And you didn't have his address? I didn't even know his last name. He asked to be called Monsieur Charles. That's what everyone called him. Not just my wife and I, but our staff as well. Oh! He was a connoisseur, a true judge of birds. I could never understand why he didn't enter as canaries in competitions. Some of them sang beautifully and could have taken any number of prizes. First prizes. I assure you, in your opinion, was he a wealthy man? Wealthy? No, monsieur. Comfortable. There wasn't a hint of stinginess in him, but he knew the value of a franc. In short, a thoroughly respectable man, an excellent man, and a customer like few others I have. Did he ever come to see you with anyone else? Never. Thank you, Monsieur Jussium. But Monsieur Jussium did not leave. There is one circumstance that occupies my mind, disturbs me, even if the newspapers are to be believed. There are no birds in the apartment on Rue de Dames. If the canaries he bought from me were there, they certainly wouldn't have failed to mention it. Would they? He had no fewer than 200 of them, and that's not something you see every day. In other words, you're afraid that they... Yes, that they are in some place where, now that Monsieur Charles is gone, there is no one to look after them. Very well, Monsieur Jussium, I promise. If we manage to track them down, we will inform you immediately so you can see them properly, assuming, of course, it isn't too late. Thank you. It's mostly my wife who is anxious. Goodbye, Monsieur Jussium. The door closed. Well now, my dear Lucas, what do you make of all this? Have you received the experts' reports? They just brought them in. First came the report from the forensic medical examiner. According to Dr. Paul's explanation, Tremblet's death had been a matter of sheer fluke accident. There were 40 lines of medical jargon and reasoning of which the commissaire understood nothing. Hello, Dr. Paul? Would you be so kind as to explain what you meant in your report? Simply that the bullet shouldn't have even entered the victim's chest cavity. It lacked sufficient penetrating power. If it hadn't, by some miracle, slipped through the thin muscle tissue between the ribs, it never would have reached the heart or caused a life-threatening injury. He was just unlucky, that's all. Dr. Paul concluded it required a specific angle of fire, and for him to be sitting in exactly that pose. Do you believe the killer accounted for all that when he took aim? I believe the killer is a fool, Dr. Paul replied. A fool who perhaps doesn't shoot half badly, since he managed to hit your Tremblet, but who could never have aimed precisely enough to hit the heart on purpose. In my opinion, he knows very little about firearms. This was confirmed by Gaston Renet, the ballistics expert. According to his findings, the projectile was a 3mm lead pellet from a pneumatic rifle, the kind used in fairground shooting galleries. One curious detail: the killer had meticulously filed the pellet to make it sharper. When Maigret asked for clarification, the expert replied, "No, that didn't increase its lethality at all. Quite the opposite. Upon entering the body, a rounded pellet causes more damage than a pointed one. The person who did this undoubtedly imagined he'd come up with something very clever, but in reality, he knows nothing of ballistics. An amateur, then, probably read something in a detective novel and understood it exactly backward. That was all they had established by 11 o'clock the morning after the murder of Maurice Tremblet. On Rue de Dames, Juliet was scurrying between her daily chores and the new burdens brought by the death of the head of the family. A violent death at that. To make matters worse, she was besieged from morning till night by newspapermen, while photographers lay in ambush on the stairs. What did that commissaire want from you? Nothing, Mama. You're lying. Everyone always lies to me. Even your father. He lied to me, deceived me for years. Tears flowed in a stream. She sobbed and sniffled but continued to talk, fussing over the housework and dealing out clips around the ears to the children, who had to be dressed in black by tomorrow for the funeral. Somewhere, 200 hungry canaries were waiting to be fed. Turning to Lucas, Maigret said with a sigh, "There's nothing to do but wait. Wait for the results of the published photographs. Wait for someone to recognize Maurice Tremblet or Monsieur Charles. He must have been somewhere during those 7 years. If he changed his clothes away from home, if he bought songbirds in cages, he must have had a hideout, a room, an apartment, perhaps an entire house. And therefore, he had dealt with a landlord, a concierge, or a servant, Perhaps he had friends? Maybe even a mistress? It was ridiculous to admit, but Maigret was handling this case with a certain tremor of excitement, something he wouldn't have dared confess even to himself. Poor men don't get killed. And so, a man Maigret had never seen in his life, whose very existence he hadn't even suspected, a man who at first seemed so gray and uninteresting, who had died the most absurd death sitting on a bed where the dismal Juliet lay dozing, and from a bullet that should never have killed him at all, this man had become close to Maigret, a rifle from a fairground gallery, the kind used to shoot clay pipes or little balls dancing on a jet of water, and the killer himself, painstakingly sharpening a lead pellet in the hope of making it more lethal. By all appearances, he too was nothing more than a miserable, poor devil. A man who left nothing behind in his room at the Hotel Excelsior but an old comb with missing teeth. He had a liver ailment. That was almost everything they knew about him. Lucas had gone back out on the hunt. Dull, thankless work, no joy, no glory. Visiting every shop and stall in Paris that sold weapons, then every shooting gallery, because that fellow might have bought the rifle right there. Inspector John Vere was questioning the merchants along the Quai du Louvre and the Quai de la Mégisserie, as well as the owners of the bistros near the Pont Neuf and the Pont des Arts, where Tremblet might have stopped for a glass of wine, while waiting for his daughter. Finally, the sturdy Torrance was dealing with taxi drivers, because it isn't every day a passenger hauls around large bird aviaries. As for Maigret, he was sitting in a little restaurant in the Place Dauphine, luxuriating as he sipped a beer on the open terrace, shaded by a red and yellow striped awning. His glass was already half empty, and now, waiting for the hour to head home for lunch, Maigret enjoyed his pipe, though his brow remained furrowed. Something was vaguely bothering him, but he couldn't quite grasp the source of his unease. It seemed someone had said something to him, either yesterday or this morning. It had struck him forcefully, something very important, but he had forgotten exactly what it was. Some short, insignificant phrase. And yet, he remembered it well. He had noted it to himself immediately at the time. He had even wondered if it held the key to this whole mysterious business. So, who had he heard it from? Perhaps during the questioning of that high-bosomed girl in the little red hat? He sifted through everything she had told him, returning to the scene at the corner of Rue du Sentier, when she had run after her father, and seen him walk right past his place of work. The earrings? No, the fact that father and daughter sometimes went to the cinema in secret? In the end, Francine was Tremblet's favorite. He must have felt no small amount of pride when he went walking with her, or bought her valuable things behind her mother's back. No, not that. The short phrase was connected to something else entirely. But what? A stray beam of sunlight fell across him from above, and in that light, a never-ending dance of tiny golden dust motes swirled, like in a room where the bed-sheets had just been shaken out. On Rue de Dames, that's where he had heard it. The kitchen door had been open, and Juliet was speaking. What was she talking about then that had made him feel as if, in another moment, he would understand everything? Joseph, how much do I owe you? A very short phrase. He tried to remember it all the way home. And at home, when he sat at lunch with his jacket off and his elbows on the table, he was still thinking about it. Madame Maigret, seeing that her husband was preoccupied, eventually fell silent. But as she served the fruit, she couldn't help herself and said, "Tell me, don't you think it's disgusting when a man—" Of course. But Madame Maigret didn't know Juliet. She hadn't seen the apartment on Rue de Dames. The short phrase was on the tip of his tongue, right there alongside his wife's words. Tell me, is it disgusting? One more effort, one small push. But the flash of lightning never came. He tossed his napkin on the table, packed his pipe, poured himself a glass of Calvados, and sat by the window, resting for a moment before heading back to the Quai d'Orfèvres. 3. The Trail of the Angler. That same day, at 6 in the evening, Maigret and Lucas stepped out of a taxi far beyond the Austerlitz Bridge, on the Quai de la Gare. With them was a ragged, limping little man who looked very much like a tramp. It was here that inspiration finally struck Maigret, and a short phrase he had tried so long and so vainly to recall suddenly surfaced in his memory. He couldn't stand noise. Tremblet, this poor man murdered while sitting in his underwear on the edge of his bed, scratching his aching soles. This Tremblet, who lived on Rue de Dames with 5 rowdy, disobedient children, and a wife who knew only how to whine and complain. This Tremblet could not stand noise. There are people who cannot stand certain smells. Others fear the cold or the heat. Maigret remembered a divorce case involving a couple who had lived together for 26 or 27 years. Demanding a dissolution of the marriage, the husband had told the court, "I simply cannot get used to the smell of my wife." But Tremblet could not stand noise. And so, when certain as yet unclear circumstances allowed him to leave his job at Couvreur and Bellechasse on the noisy Rue du Sentier, he had established a sanctuary here, on one of the most deserted quays in Paris. It was a quiet, wide embankment. Rows of sleepy barges swayed lazily at their moorings. Everything here breathed a provincial peace. The small 2-story houses lining the Seine, among which a few taller buildings and bistros with seemingly no customers had accidentally strayed, and the courtyards, where a passerby might be surprised to see chickens scratching in the manure. The discovery belonged to Old Man Cherry, a hobbling ragamuffin who camped under the nearby bridge, as he loftily put it when he arrived at the prefecture ahead of the others. While he waited to be seen, 3 more arrived, a motley crew, all just as tattered as Old Man Cherry, the kind of characters one only ever encounters on the Parisian quays. "I got here first, didn't I, commissaire? Been sitting here half an hour. None of them were here yet. So the reward belongs to me." "What reward?" "What? You mean there's no reward? Where was the justice?" Old Man Cherry was sincerely outraged. "How can that be? People give rewards for a runaway lapdog, and here a man wants to show you where that poor murdered soul lived. Fine, we'll work something out for you, if the information is worth it." They began to haggle. 100 francs, 50, they settled on 20. They took him with them. And now they stood before a small, whitewashed 2-story house with closed shutters. I saw him here almost every morning. He'd come and sit with his rod right over there by the tugboat. That's how we got acquainted. At first, he wasn't doing too well, but I helped him, gave him tips, pointers. And Lord, the roach he started pulling in after that. You could say he caught M on a bare hook. With my help, of course. At 11 o'clock, he'd reel in his lines, pack up his rods, and head inside. That's how I knew where he lived. Maigret rang the bell just in case, and a tinny, ancient chime echoed hollowly inside. Lucas set to work with his lockpicks, and a minute later, the door was open. "I'll be right here, close by," said Old Man Cherry. "Just call if you need me." For a moment, they felt a twinge of unease. A scent of desolation wafted from the house, yet within it, they heard a strange, dry rustling. It took a moment to realize it was the sound of canaries fluttering in their aviaries. The cages stood in 2 rooms on the ground floor. The rooms themselves seemed bare and uninhabited. Aside from the bird cages, there was almost nothing else in them. Their voices boomed in the empty space. Maigret and Lucas moved through the rooms, opening doors and creating sudden drafts that caused the only curtains in the entire house to billow against the street-facing windows. How many years had it been since these walls were papered? The wallpaper was utterly faded, marked by dark patches that outlined the silhouettes of various pieces of furniture that had stood there at different times. Ghostly traces left by everyone who had ever lived in these rooms. Lucas watched the commissaire with surprise. Before getting down to business, Maigret poured fresh water for canaries and filled the feeders with small, glistening yellow seeds. "You see, old friend? Here, at least, he could have some peace." By one of the windows stood an old-fashioned wicker armchair. There was also a table, 2 or 3 mismatched chairs, and on the shelves, an entire collection of historical and adventure novels. On the ground floor was a metal bed, covered with a magnificent down quilt of red satin that shimmered with all the colors of the rainbow. The dream of a wealthy peasant woman. He couldn't have had much fun here, could he, Chief? The kitchen! Plates, glasses, a frying pan. Maigret sniffed. The pan smelled of fish. In a scrap bucket that hadn't been emptied for several days lay fish bones and scales. In a niche, a set of fishing rods was neatly arranged. Don't you find it a clever setup, eh? Evidently, Tremblet understood happiness in his own way. Quiet rooms where no one but he ever entered, fishing on the banks of the Seine. He had 2 folding chairs, one of which was a deluxe model, clearly very expensive, songbirds in beautiful cages, and books, heaps of books in colorful covers, books he could enjoy in absolute silence and peace. But the most curious thing was the contrast between the poverty of the overall furnishings and certain individual, expensive items. Among the fishing rods, one was an imported English model that must have cost at least several thousand francs. In one of the drawers of the house's only dresser lay a gold lighter, engraved with the initials empty and a costly cigarette case. Do you make any sense of this at all, Chief? Yes, Maigret was beginning to understand, especially after he found several completely useless items, like a magnificent electric model train. You see, for years he wanted to own things like this. You think he actually played with that train? I wouldn't bet against it. Haven't you ever bought things you dreamed of as a child? So, Tremblet came here in the morning, just as others go to their offices, and sat with his fishing rod directly across from his house. Then he returned to Rue de Dames for his second breakfast, perhaps occasionally after eating a fish from his own catch. He tended to his canaries. He read. He likely read for hours on end, sitting in that wicker armchair by the window. And all around him, it was quiet. No one pestered him. No one shouted. From time to time, he went to the cinema, sometimes with his daughter. And once, he bought her gold earrings. Where do you think the money came from? An inheritance, or did he steal it? Maigret didn't answer. He kept walking from room to room, looking while old man Cherry stood guard outside the house. Go back to the Quai d'Orfèvres. Have inquiries sent to every bank in Paris. We need to find out if Tremblet opened a current account. Check the notary-in-law offices, too. However, he held little hope for that. Tremblet was too discreet. He had too much of that deep-seated peasant caution to risk keeping his money somewhere it could be easily discovered. Are you staying here? Yes, I'll likely be here all night. Listen, bring me some sandwiches and 2 or 3 bottles of beer, and call my wife. Warn her I might not be home today. See to it that the newspapers don't write anything about this house for now. If you like, I can come back to keep you company or send one of the inspectors. Don't bother. He didn't even have a weapon with him. What for? And so the hours drifted by, hours very much like the ones the master of the house must have spent here. Maigret even flipped through several books from that peculiar library. Almost all of them had been read multiple times. Then he spent a long time poking through the fishing rods. It seemed to him that for a man like Tremblet, a hollow rod would be the ideal hiding place. 2,000 francs a month for 7 years. A solid little capital, not even counting the money he spent on himself. But where was the nest egg hidden? At 8 in the evening, just as Maigret began inspecting the aviaries in search of a hiding place, a taxi pulled up to the entrance. It was Lucas, accompanied by a young woman who was clearly in a very foul mood. I didn't know what to do. There's no phone here, the sergeant said, looking somewhat sheepish. In the end, I decided the best thing was to bring her here to you. This is the mistress. She was a tall, large brunette with a coarse, floury, pale face. Glaring warily at the commissaire, she spat out, I hope no one's planning to accuse me of killing him. Come in, Maigret said quietly. In this house, you likely know your way around better than I do. Me? This is the first time I've ever set eyes on this filthy hole. 5 minutes ago, I didn't even know it existed. And the air in here, it's not exactly fresh, is it? Evidently, it was her nose that was sensitive, not her eardrums. Before sitting down, the first thing she did was flick the dust off the offered chair. 4. The Fourth Life of Maurice Tremblet. Olga Jean Marie Pisano, 29 years old, originally from St. Euros-sur-Isère, of no fixed occupation. Address: Hotel Beau Séjour, Rue Lepic, Paris, 18th arrondissement. Almost immediately, this towering woman with a face as round as a harvest moon began to chatter away. I want it noted, Monsieur Commissaire, that I came here my own accord. As soon as I saw his photo in the paper, I told myself, I mustn't be afraid of trouble. I simply must. Tremblet visited you at the hotel? Yes, twice a week. So, the proprietor and the staff knew him by sight? Oh, and how? They knew him very well. For the last 5 years, ever since it all began. They saw the photograph, too, then... What are you trying to say? She bit her lip, the realization finally dawning on her. Well, yes, the owner did ask if that was Monsieur Charles in the picture, but I would have come anyway. I don't doubt it. So you knew him as Monsieur Charles's? I met him by chance on Boulevard Roquecourt, coming out of the cinema. I was working as a waitress in a self-service place, at the place Clichy back then. He followed me. He told me he only visited Paris occasionally. Twice a week. Yes, by the second or third time we met. He walked me back to the hotel and came up to my room. That's how it started. He was the one who insisted I quit my job. Why had Tremblet taken a liking to her? Clearly, because Juliet was small, thin, and colorless, while this woman was tall, dark-haired, and substantial. Substantial was a key word, evidently. Her moon-like face suggested to Tremblet not just a fullness of form, but a softness of character, perhaps even a certain sentimentality. I soon realized he was a bit, well, what do you mean by, a bit of a dreamer. I mean, he was forever going on about whisking me away to the country. It was all he dreamed about. He'd hardly arrive before he'd be dragging me off to some park to sit on a bench. He pestered me about that idiotic country idea for months, begging me to go with him for even just a couple of days. And in the end, he wore me down. Do you think I had any fun there? Hardly. He supported you? He gave me only enough for the bare essentials. I had to pretend I made all my own clothes. He wanted me to spend my days sewing and darning, you see. A total farce. 100 times I tried to throw him out. I told him exactly what I thought of him, but he wouldn't budge. You couldn't shake him. Then he'd show up with presents, writing me these miles-long letters. Why are you laughing? Oh, it's nothing. Poor Tremblet. He had tried to escape Juliet, only to run straight into Olga. In short, you spent a good deal of your time together arguing? Yes, a fair amount. And you never once felt curious enough to follow him, to find out where he lived? He told me it was somewhere near the Gare de Lens, and I believe him. Besides, I didn't really care. You probably had another friend then? Well, of course I had friends, but nothing serious. And did you tell them about your relationship with Monsieur Charles? You don't think I was proud of him, do you? He looked like a sacristan from some starving parish. Did you ever see him with anyone else? Never. I told you, his only joy was sitting with me on a park bench. Is it true he was very rich? Who told you that? I read in the paper that he'd likely come into a huge inheritance. And here I am without a cent in my pocket. That's my luck, I suppose. Just like Juliet Maigret thought. Tell me, am I in trouble? Of course not. We just need to verify your statement. Right, Lucas? And the statement was verified in every detail, right down to the rose that Olga would pick with poor Tremblet every time he visited, for her temperament was, quite frankly, vicious. Throughout the night and into the following day, Maigret searched every nook and cranny of the house on the Quai de la Gare. He found absolutely nothing. It was with a touch of regret that Maigret finally left the house on the Quai de la Gare. He had spent so many hours there, alone with his poor devil, peering into the most intimate corners of a hidden life. He ordered a 24-hour stakeout, stationing several inspectors in the vicinity. It will yield something eventually, he told the chief of the judicial police. It may take time, but I am convinced the result will be positive. They checked for any suspicious companions in Francine's life. They shadowed Olga. They kept a watchful eye on the vagrants haunting the quai de la Gare. From the banks, the inquiries returned nothing but rejections. The notaries were equally silent. A telegram from Cantle confirmed the truth. Tremblet had never received an inheritance. The heat wave persisted. Tremblet was buried. His wife and children prepared to leave for the provinces, for their meager resources no longer allowed them to survive in Paris. The world now knew the Tremblet of Rue des Dames. They knew the Tremblet of the Quai de la Gare, and the Tremblet who visited Olga. The man who loved fishing, canaries, and adventure novels was no longer a mystery. But what could be called his fourth life was revealed by a waiter from a Parisian café. The man appeared one morning at the Quai d'Orfèvres and asked to see Maigret. "Forgive me for not coming sooner, but I've been working the summer season in Sables-d'Olonne," he explained. "When I saw the photograph in the paper, I meant to write, but it slipped my mind. I am almost certain this is a gentleman who used to play billiards in our café, on the corner of Boulevard Saint-Germain and Rue de Seine. He had a partner, presumably?" "Yes, of course. A tall, thin man with reddish hair and a small mustache. Tremblet called him Theodore. They were on familiar terms. They came in every day around 4 and left at 6. Theodore drank aperitifs. Tremblet, on the other hand, never touched a drop of alcohol. In a city as vast as Paris, a man comes and goes, vanishing into the crowd. Yet sooner or later, his shadow is cast upon a wall. Tremblet's tracks have been found at the birdseller's shop and in a shady hotel on Rue Lepic. Now, it appeared he had also spent years in a modest cafe with a red-haired giant. When did you see him last? It's been over a year since I left that job. Torrance, Janvier, Lucas, and the other inspectors began a sweep of every cafe and restaurant in Paris equipped with a billiard table. Not far from the Pont Neuf, they struck gold. For several months, the pair had played there, but information on Theodore was sparse. They knew only that he drank heavily and, after every glass, mechanically wiped his mustache with the back of his hand. A man of modest means. Poorly dressed, really. Tremblet always picked up the tab. The police hunted Theodore for weeks, but he remained elusive. Then, an idea struck Maigret. He would return to the firm of Couvreur and Bellichasse. Theodore? Monsieur more mused. "Yes, we had a Theodore here once, though it was a long time ago. Wait, he left us 12 years back. I'm certain he knew Monsieur Tremblet. This Theodore, I can find his surname in the files, was a messenger. We sacked him for habitual drunkenness and for being intolerably insolent when in his cups. The name was Ballard, Theodore Ballard. Yet no Ballard could be found in any boarding house in Paris or its suburbs. Another faint lead appeared. 5 years ago, a Theodore Ballard had worked the carousels at the Montmartre fairs. One night, while drunk, he had broken his arm and vanished from the scene. This man and the figure with the air rifle at the Hotel Excelsior were undoubtedly one and the same. What chance encounter had reunited the cashier with the messenger? Whatever the cause, they had met regularly for years. Had Theodore discovered his friend's secret? Had he guessed that money was hidden in the house on the quay? Or had the two friends simply quarreled? "Keep watching the quay," Maigret muttered. The surveillance continued. Soon, a standing joke developed among the inspectors. "What are you doing tonight?" "Oh, I'm guarding the canaries." But it was this very persistence that led to the end. One night, a tall, gaunt man with reddish mustaches and a limp arm crept into the house. He looked like a crippled beggar. Torrance lunged at him from behind, and the man began to plead for mercy. Tremblet had been a poor soul, and his killer was no different. Theodore was a pitiful sight. He hadn't eaten in days. Homeless, he had been wandering the streets and quays. He surely knew the house was watched, which was why he had hesitated for so long. But in the end, hunger broke him. "So be it," he sighed. "It's better this way. I can go on. I was starving." At 2 a.m, he sat in Maigret's office, devouring sandwiches and beer, answering every question with a desperate readiness. "I'm a bastard, I know it, but you don't know how Maurice was. So secretive, so shifty. He never breathed a word about having a house on the quay. He didn't trust me. Billiards was fine, but everything else? He kept his cards to his chest. I'd borrow a few francs now and then. Pittance, really, and you should have seen the struggle to get out of him. Maybe I lost my head. I was flat broke. My landlady was hounding me for the rent. And then he tells me it's the last time, that the wells run dry, that he's bored of billiards anyway. He dismissed me like a servant. That's when I followed him. I saw the life he was leading. I knew there had to be money hidden in that house. And so you decided to kill him first. Maigret growled, drawing on his pipe. That only proves I didn't do it for greed. I did it because he insulted me. Otherwise, I'd have just broken him while he was out. The House of Secrets was searched 10 times by the finest experts, but it wasn't until a year later, when the building was sold and the murder of Tremblet was forgotten, that the money was finally found. It wasn't behind a wall or under the floorboards. It was tucked away in a neglected little cupboard on the second floor. It was an oilcloth packet, stuffed with banknotes. It contained over 2.5 million francs. Upon hearing the figure, Maigret did a quick calculation and finally understood. He took a taxi to the Pavillon de Flore. Do you have the list of winners for the National Lottery? Not a complete list. Some choose to remain anonymous. The law protects them. Here, for example, 7 years ago, it was Tremblet. He had won 3 million francs. He had walked away with the money tucked under his arm, and he had never breathed a single word of it to anyone. The man who couldn't stand noise had spent 7 years by his way into a quiet life of small, previously impossible joys. Poor men don't get killed. And yet, he was only ever a poor man. A poor man murdered on his bed, sitting in his underwear and scratching his aching feet before sleep.